Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. What changes will the City Council make to the Mayor's new budget proposal? Is a $100 million plan for the homeless a good investment? What impact will a new city law have on environmental reviews for land use projects? Councilmember Abel Pacheco and Council President Bruce Harrell answer these questions and the ones you're sending in too. Next on Council Edition.
I think what we've learned is we save the box, but not the show.
We have to reverse this false narrative that Seattle is dying. Seattle is not dying.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here we are with Council President Bruce Harrell and Councilmember Abel Pacheco. Thank you both for joining me. I know we're right on the brink of really diving into the budget preparations here, so we'll start with that. We are taping this show just as the city really starts into this process. I want some general thoughts to think with. Council President Harrell, a $6.5 billion package presented by the mayor. Things you're liking there, things you want to change, general thoughts to start.
Well, when I hear that term, $6.5 billion, that's sort of new because they're talking about the other revenue streams from the Power, Utility, City Light, and SPU, which are dedicated revenue streams toward those. And so I try to focus in on the general sub-fund, which is what most people think about on the budget. But in any event, we're, of course, increasing our spending strategies on our homeless issue. We're looking at building more affordable housing, doing all of the core things that we think are the touchy areas in our city where we hear a lot of talk about. I think she proposed a very strong, very good budget, and I look forward to tweaking it on some things that we're looking at on the council. But I was very pleased with what she tendered. Okay, and we'll go into some of those details in just a little bit. Councilmember Pacheco, you're in an interesting position here. You're going to be leaving office right after the election in November, very close to the time the budget is finalized. I want to talk about your reactions to the mayor's proposal and what impact you see yourself having on this process going forward.
Sure. Well, now that I'm in my final 6 weeks, I'm being mindful of just how I think the budget can be reflective of our values. And so I've been mindful of what I've been hearing in the district. I've held district office hours every Friday while I've been on the council. And so been mindful of just where are those investments in terms of our infrastructure and preparation for the 2 new light rail stations that are going to open up. As well as the issue of homelessness. What are we doing in terms of providing additional supports for folks? And one thing I've also heard is, and especially this was true over the summer, as a lot of constituents were really concerned and frustrated with what the images they would see on TV on a federal level with kids and at the border, what the city was doing in response to our immigrant communities. And so it's also something that I'm mindful of in terms of kind of keeping an eye on with regards to the mayor's budget and the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And so going to be looking with a fine-tuned comb over the details of the mayor's budget. We've been doing that and looking forward to this next week where we're going to start doing the deeper dives.
Yeah, for sure. And let's dive in a little bit if we can. And Bruce, I'll start with you. The council, I know, has had some questions about homeless spending. It's up over $100 million for the first time with the mayor's proposal here. There are concerns that the navigation team in particular might not be connecting people to shelter as often as first thought. They make referrals, and only 30% of the time it looks like people are actually showing up to the shelter. I know we're holding a lot of the nonprofits here in Seattle having their feet to the fire when it comes to these kind of results. What do you think about what's happening with the navigation team?
So, first of all, I think it's great that the city and Warren are tracking this in such detail that we are. First, that was the first issue. Years ago, we weren't tracking this level of detail. That sets us up for criticism. Now, we have to understand that the percentages that are being referred to are based on the contacts. And I'm not sure, contact could simply be a member of the navigation team saying, hey, Brian, how are you today? That's a contact. And we're trying to understand why you are homeless or what we can do. A lot of people don't want quick shelter as a mat on a floor as an example. I think there's one interview where a person talked about, hey, I don't want to be around others. I don't want bed bugs. So the bed bug possibility, whatever his or her fears could be. So number one, we're tracking it. That's good. Number two is the navigation team are taking this feedback and we are investing to see why people don't want shelter. But we have to also understand this demographic. Many of them have drug and alcohol problems. Some of them are just down on their luck. There's mental illness, and many of them have what would be diagnosed as social deviant behavior. So you're dealing with a different demographic. So to think that you should have a 90% take rate for what would not be people in that demographic, I think that's would be troublesome. So I'm not alarmed by this at all. But I will say this as well, that when we increase our spending to over $100 million, that is the right thing to do. That we have to reverse this false narrative that Seattle is dying. Seattle is not dying. We have the growing pains of a city where people are coming here 50, 60 a day from different cities in the state, from different states in the country, and from different countries in the world. And so we are a growing city, a thriving city. We have booming companies doing very well here. And so this is a side effect, if you will, a growth effect of this kind of receiving people. And I think we've created a whole new subclass of poverty. And so you have people that just might have been somewhat poor or less affluent when I was a young man in the dinosaur ages, but now they are a step away from being homeless, or they are homeless. And so these are problems we're grappling with. And so this spending plan is the right thing to do.
And Abel, I'll bring in here your thoughts about the navigation team. Are you concerned about their work you're doing, the additional dollars going that way, or at least the proposed dollars going that way?
Well, let me just add to Council President Harrell's point. You know, I think the city of Seattle is a victim of its own success. We're one of the most educated cities on the West Coast, booming economy, and so I think we've seen a rise of just the issues of homelessness in our communities. And when we talk about our increased spending on homelessness, I mean, we have to also be mindful of the fact that at any given night we have about 13 open shelter beds. And so, you know, we need to increase capacity and as well as, I think, lower the temperature down a little bit with regards to just the different services and that we provide as a city and teams that we have as a city that are trying to address this issue, because I think all of us are trying to move forward in a direction that I think hopefully can get people on their own 2 feet.
Were you concerned, though, when you saw that percentage there in terms of navigation team making these referrals, people not showing up to shelter? What did that say to you?
Well, this is a very complex and nuanced issue. And so why folks aren't getting connected to those services or following up with those services, every individual is different. And so I take that in consideration too.
Okay.
And I take it as a yes and approach, meaning that we have to be doing all these things at the same time.
Okay. Abel, I'll stay with you. Just before the taping of the show, Councilmember Sawant is talking about a budget proposal, wants $12 million to expand the tiny house villages across Seattle here, block relocation of the Georgetown, North Lake villages. I think about North Lake right on the border of your district there in D4. Your thoughts about this tiny house proposal that Councilmember Sawant's been talking about?
Well, it's currently held up right now in a SEPA appeal, which is unfortunate, I think, because I think Councilmember Sawant, this is an area where I would like to be able to dig deeper into a proposal. Unfortunately, it won't come up in my time.
Yeah.
But, you know, we know tiny home villages are part of the solution. I think all of us on the council have kind of said, you know, it's one of the many options that we have as a city. You know, I think when we had the conversation about Georgetown, you know, rather than relocate, why not just have them stay there? Because it's both less expensive for us as a city, but also because it can reallocate some additional resources to other services that we need to support the homeless community.
Okay. Bruce, I'll go to you. In terms of what Councilmember Sawant's been talking about, I know a lot of people, especially in Georgetown, in your district, might have an opinion about this. Your thoughts about tiny homes, the the program we have now, and what the councilmember's talking about?
Sure. So I support tiny homes and tiny house villages. I support those because it's certainly a better alternative than under a bridge in a tent during November and December. I do not support a proliferation of tiny homes or tiny house villages in the city alone. I think what we're doing and looking at this as a regional approach is the way to go. That number one, we only have 88 square miles in this city. It's tough enough for a teacher and a barista to live in this city without using space for people that are homeless. So what I would insist that is that we look at this from a regional standpoint and we find areas that are, again, close to transit, areas that we can get social services to, and look at that footprint, if you will, and work with our regional partners. The other piece of information we are gathering are the demographics of people that are moving to the city, or people that are homeless as well. Yeah. So I just don't think it makes, quite candidly, common sense to have that kind of density within 88 square miles of a city. So I look forward to a regional approach, looking at how we can house people that are coming from all over and work with our partners, other cities as well, not just the county. And so in our regional approach, we are looking at how this, at the governing board, and who has a say-so at the table. Yeah. The city of Seattle is putting in a lot of money toward this effort, but we're bringing in partners as well.
Okay. I wanted to talk about another big budget discussion around the LEAD program from the Seattle Police Department, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. I know more than a few eyebrows raised a few weeks ago when an officer talked to the council about efforts now to arrest sex workers rather than Johns who prey on them. Councilmember Pacheco, I'll start with you. Concerns about that, the fact that LEAD appears to be overstretched, doesn't have a ton of more support from the mayor's new budget proposal. Your thoughts about what's going on with LEAD?
Well, first, I want to thank Chief Best for clarifying the Deputy Chief's remarks, because I think all of us on the dais were both surprised and just taken aback.
Yeah.
You know, and to Council President Harrell's point, you know, he had made the outreach effort of saying, this is why I think it's best that each department leader come and speak before the council, so that we can dig deeper in these conversations and have the person at the helm leading that discussion. You know, I again, as an earlier point, I look at this as a yes and conversation.
Okay.
You know, what I've heard is that there's a need for a robust data system within LEAD, and myself and Councilmember Bagshaw reached out personally to Microsoft to help secure that in support of LEAD, the data system that they needed, and as well as help steward the additional resources that needed to implement that data system. So I know that they're going to have that robust data system moving forward. We know that diversion programs like LEAD are helpful to our community. We know what we've done with the criminal justice system as well as arresting folks. It just hasn't worked. Yeah. So this is a conversation that I think, as we see the budget for LEAD, we're going to support its growth, and I will continue to do what I can, at least during this budget cycle, to support it as well.
Okay, and Bruce, your thoughts about this, the future of LEAD in this year's budget and beyond? It just sounds like it's a program police want to use, but it seems stretched very thin right now.
It seems stretched very thin, and the decision we are trying to make is whether we shift another $3 million toward the program or not. And to Councilmember Pacheco's point, that's exactly why I was fairly direct on wanting the Chief Best there to give us her insight on whether this is a wise investment strategy or not. And I want to go back to the Deputy Chief's remarks that for me, at the core of race and social justice is the willingness to try to look at any issue from the view or lens of the other person, of another person. I'm not a woman, and so I have to really think about what I could draw upon to think about many issues in sex trafficking as a victim or survivor of abuse or of that kind of lifestyle. And I have to be ultra sensitive. And I ask for permission to make a mistake. If I say something incorrectly, I want that leeway, but it's not for the lack of trying. I talked to you before stage, I said about what happened in Fort Worth about a black woman being shot in her home by an officer that I think was on the force less than a year. Now, my take on this, and Councilmember Pacheco talk about these issues all the time, many people may just say, wow, that's tragic, that's bad, that's a bad thing. I think on any level anyone would say that. But for some people, particularly people of color, I'll give an example that I have 3 African-American children who may not look like they belong in the house that my wife and I live in. And if we're not there and a police officer comes there because a neighbor called, that stuff gets to our core about being shot in your own home. So for us, it's a strong reaction of anger. And so I ask people in the world of police accountability to look at these issues, not just, oh, that was a bad thing that happened in Texas, to how it affects real lives here. And I could talk the length of the show on why I ask people to do that. And often I think the council and the mayor and city leaders, sometimes we don't walk or talk our talk. And then that was an example of where I think he said something about the choices these women make or something. It was so clumsy that I said, he he doesn't, and he might be a fine human being. Don't get me wrong, and that's why I said, hey, we all say things we regret. It came out a little differently than we wanted them to, but I thought that demonstrated, at least at that moment in time, a poor understanding of what this lead was about.
Yeah, and this race and social justice overlay, I don't think you can have a conversation about this without looking at that issue. Abel, I just want to make sure that you chimed in here too, because I know that's an issue that's important to you as well.
Yeah, and I mean, just to Council President Harrell's point, you know, the lived experience matters in this role. I grew up with, you know, I'm Mexican, but I grew up with a black dad. And, you know, when I think back of my childhood, my dad used to have to tell me stories about, one, how to best engage with police for my own safety. As a black man, you know, why did he have to have this conversation with me? And, you know, I'm particularly mindful about that conversation of accountability when it comes to officers. What the deputy chief said, you know, as much as he regrets it, and again, appreciate that the chief best clarified those remarks. I want to make sure that we're following the Nordic model that focuses on both supporting survivors of sex trafficking and keeping our focus on the folks who are abusing or having consequences for the buyers.
The Johns, yeah, that's definitely a big piece of this. Thanks for that back and forth there. Abel, I'm going to stick with you and talk about the work the council has done to, quote, streamline how the State Environmental Protection Act is used here in Seattle when it comes to appealing land use projects. I know when some people hear the word streamline, they get really concerned about impacting the environment. Help us understand what the council has done here. I know there's a state law piece that is involved here too. Yeah. What impact do you think this new ordinance is going to have?
Well, this HB 1923 was passed this past legislative session. The same groups that had sought to make additional improvements, the Sierra Club, for example, had advocated for that change down in Olympia. We also heard from those advocates of saying, we need to make additional changes. Right. Let's have the city let's have the city follow up with what the state has done. The state gave cities 2 years until the spring of 2021 to make those updates. And so what we had seen, and as a city, and very quickly you see this in the short time that I was on the council, I think within the first month of my time on the council, we brought up and we discussed the accessory dwelling unit legislation, the backyard cottages. That was held up in SEPA. My predecessor, MHA, that was held up in SEPA. This summer, Fort Lawton, that was held up in SEPA appeals, and as well as, you know, the Bullitt Center, which is a crown jewel of the Pacific Northwest, the most environmentally forward-thinking commercial facility in the world, also held up in SEPA. And so what this bill and the updates did was get us in compliance with HB 1923, as well as put a time window of 120 days of when how long appeals can go, with an additional 30 days if both parties agree. And so we hope to be able to cut down on some of those lengthy appeals that go on for years, because we know, as I said during my remarks on the council, that these appeals have consequences. And to me, those consequences are for so many struggling families and individuals that are looking for a place to live. Because as we had started the conversation earlier with the issue of homelessness, a lot of folks, and as cities growing, the cities changing, are looking for a place to live that's affordable. And so these delays are sometimes being weaponized and abused, and we would try to make the effort to limit those chances for abuse. If I can just say one last thing.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
You know, there was this narrative about how we were doing it in the process. It was a process that took us 4 months as a city. And I met with the diversity of stakeholders who were going to be impacted. Some of the very folks who spoke against it during the Plus Committee. I met with them in my office. Even went on the Jason Ranch show. So I made sure that I was as inclusive as I could be through that process. And if we didn't agree, that's okay. But I think amendments that were offered both through committee and at the full council with Councilmember Herbold, as well as Councilmember Mosqueda, Councilmember O'Brien, as well as just some of the neighborhood advocates in the district in Wallingford, I met with as well. And make sure that those amendments were able to help us move the ball forward.
Okay, thank you for breaking all that down. Bruce, I just was looking at this overall. You're a council member. I know you're an attorney too. Legal ramifications you see coming out of this, impact it could have on affordable housing. There's a lot of different issues potentially with this.
Yeah, and I just thinking, and I'm going to say Abel now since he's able and capable.
Right. I see what you did there. All right, yeah,
I like that,
okay.
Fonzie, I got it in there.
Yeah.
He demonstrated why he was a great selection for the Councilmember Johnson's vacancy. As you could see, he was a quick study and really dove in. And not only did I trust his ability to, his integrity, I trust his ability, his command of the issues. And so one of the points I made during the SEPA process was, I mean, I do value as an attorney one's right to appeal anything that we do. And I have a history of litigating matters against the city when I think the city has done something either unlawful or ineffectively. So I thought Councilmember Pacheco, Abel, struck the right balance, listening to the amendments, did the right outreach, and so I was comfortable with the final package. But I will tell you that while I heard that term, weaponizing, SEPA being weaponized, and I just thought that was as strong of a term. Everyone seems to use it, so maybe I'll start using it. But I saw that people, when they are challenging it, it was a tool, and I'm glad the state gave us a little more leeway to improve the process, because it's delayed some great projects. And so I think we came up with a good package, and I want to give Abel his props for navigating through what would be very difficult legislation, but he came up with a good package.
And if I can just real quickly add, the process in itself is not done. SDCI will be creating a handbook that would provide some guidelines for how to do a SEPA analysis so that it's consistent, and as well as the hearing examiner will come back with during their annual report next year to identify opportunities for additional work to be done on the front end, so that all parties have a more transparent process and a process that I think will remain as inclusive, because SDCI, as well as the hearing examiner, the director of SDCI and the hearing examiner in those amendments with Councilmember Herbold, make sure that it's a robust community engagement process that will help drive what those guidelines and those annual report recommendations will be.
All right, thanks for putting an exclamation point on that one. Abel, I'll stick with you. I'm going to pick up the pace ever so slightly here. Heading to the mailbag, talking about the Showbox Theater. Yeah. Said he just settled a $40 million suit with the owner of this building for $915,000. This followed the move by the council to place this building in the Pike Place Historical District. A few comments here. This is a huge waste of our money for a dump of a building. There's one. Another, if you are truly a Seattleite, you would not want to see this musical monument closed. What is next for this building? I know you've had concerns about it. Another development here, I should point out, it looks like the city can buy the property next year for $41.4 million. What's next for the Showbox? Your opinions about this?
Well, I want to express my gratitude to Council President Harrell, because I think he was, as a leader of the negotiation team for the city, was able to find the best avenue for us to lower the tension a little bit. But this is one area where I strongly disagreed with Councilmember Sawant, and as well as her movement to save the Showbox. I think what we learned is we save the box, but not the show, at the end of the day. And so, you know, I looked at this as I hope, you know, the next council, as well as Councilmember Sawant, take the opportunity to learn from this experience, and hopefully we just move forward at this point. My hope is that we just really try to move the conversation forward with regards to what more we can do for housing. We know that was about approximately 300 units or so that could have been built. Yeah. We missed a $3 to $5 million MHA payment. We not only had the settlement, but also the legal fees, outside legal fees that we had to pay. So at this point, just, you know, in this job, you learn to just keep moving.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. Bruce, another one from the mailbag here. A letter about political action committee spending. Big topic in this year's council races. Kevin writes this: what are your thoughts on Councilmember Gonzalez's bill limiting PAC campaign spending? And should that apply equally to PACs backed by unions as well as corporate-backed PACs? Your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll take the second one first, and
Okay.
that is if you're going to limit PAC spending, it seems like you should just limit PAC spending, regardless as to the entity that formed the PAC. It just seems to me that they're all special interest group. I like where Councilmember Gonzalez is heading. It's, you know, with the honest elections, the voucher system, we are growing a system, hopefully, to decrease the influence of money. But now we've created more money into these races. And so I think it's a wise move to look at this, to come up with some lawful regulations, because you're going to see this raises a lot of constitutional legal issues of speech. But I think it's going to be a great conversation. But I had said when the honest election and voucher system had come about, I said that there were already pretty much safeguards in place with a $700 limit, which is now reduced to $500. I didn't see the corruption in politics that we sort of, some people would say that occurred. But ironically, PACs are everywhere now, and they are influencing races. And so I think it needs to be addressed.
Thanks very much. It's time to wrap up the show, and this is a tough one because both of you, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to have you on a Council Edition show again. You're leaving right after the election. You're leaving at the end of the year, Bruce. Abel, I'm going to start with you, reflecting on your short but very eventful term in office.
Well, I want to appreciate. There's always the behind the scenes that I think people don't get to see.
I can give you a minute, Abel. Keep going.
Well, I want to just appreciate the willingness and collaboration that I've had from my colleagues. On my very first day on the council, Council President Harrell took me with him to the Rainier Valley to really kind of just show me the ropes. And so I genuinely appreciate that. And, you know, this is, I think as the city continues to grow, we're going to face these challenges that continue to be at the forefront of everybody's mind. I hope that we kind of, after post this election, take the temperature down a little bit and focus on the solutions and how we're all operating within a very similar value system. Because I think we'll see that we have a lot more in common than we think.
All right. Bruce, you got the last word. After 12 years on the council, some thoughts here, please.
Well, you know, I love this city. I was born about a mile from here. And what concerns me is I think the brand of our city has taken some hits in the last few years. And as I've tried to say at every opportunity, this is a phenomenal city. I'm really proud to have raised my kids and now my grandkids here in the city. And so we have some phenomenal talent. I think Councilmember Pacheco, who I have a few years on, sort of exemplifies the kind of talent that's still out there willing to serve. And I tell folks, get involved. We took in around 21 young commissioners, when I say young, but they're between 18 and 29.
Okay.
29.
Yeah.
So that's not that young.
Okay.
But, and out of 75 applicants willing to serve on commissions and boards. And so I'm proud of what the council has done. I'm proud of my staff and what we've been able to accomplish. But I tell people, lead with what you love. Lead with what you're trying to create. Lead with a positive vision. And this, what I see, but on a national level and on a local level, this denigrating a person's, their motives, their intentions, there's really no room for that. I tell folks all the time, and I try to not yell, because if I'm yelling at you, I think you shut down and you're no longer listening.
Right.
I think if I try hard to make sure that I understand your position first, then you're going to try to understand mine. And
Okay.
I'm hoping that with these new batch of politicians, that they understand that there's wisdom there.
Okay. Thank you both very much. And we will see you next time on Council Edition.